All right, welcome back, everybody. We're going to talk a little bit today about dwarf tomato plants, compact tomato plants, regular plants, indeterminate, determinate. What do all of these terms mean, and show you some examples of what they are and what you should look for when you're picking out tomato varieties. Now, I'm not an expert on this, and there's no definitive information anywhere online, particularly really designating all these terms to any one particular variety of tomato. I'm just going by information that I've accumulated throughout the years, and also what I heard from other tomato growers in the field would know more than I would. First thing we want to talk about is the dwarf varieties and what's known as compact varieties. A lot of people are under the misunderstanding that dwarf varieties are a plant that only gets to around 30 inches or 3 feet tall, and they generally stay really small varieties, and they're misunderstanding what the terminology of what dwarf is. A dwarf tomato variety is a class of its own. So basically you have determinate and indeterminate, and then you have semi-determinate, which is in between. But that's a side issue, semi-determinate. That's almost like it doesn't even almost make any sense, because you could turn any determinate into almost a semi-determinate if you prune it correctly, and or do certain things to it. You can manipulate almost any determinate variety to be semi-determinate. What I'm trying to illustrate here is generally you have a determinate and indeterminate, but you also have what's known as dwarf varieties, which kind of falls into a world of its own. At least that's the way I understand it. If you looked into the creator of the Dwarf Tomato Project and stuff like that, I don't know the gentleman's name offhand, but he explains it very well. He's done some videos on it, and he really puts it together pretty good. And so dwarf varieties are generally in a world of their own, though most people call them determinate varieties because they generally reach a certain status, they put out their fruit, and then they generally die. But they're not technically considered determinate tomatoes. But again, everybody classifies them as determinate, so we'll leave it at that. But dwarf varieties are literally in a world of their own, and they kind of fall outside of the determinate, indeterminate, or even semi-determinate, or they may even fall into the semi-determinate category. The main difference between determinate, indeterminate, and dwarf, what makes the dwarfs different is, let me show you really quick, is if you look at the leaves, and these leaves are what are known as rugose leaves on dwarf varieties. And if you see the plant when they're younger, they really exhibit the rugose effect quite a bit. And what it is generally the leaves get really puffy, and they're really different in nature towards any other tomato leaf type. They're very rigid, they crack very easy, they're like a hard, crispy lettuce. If I bend this leaf too much, it starts snapping. Here's a potato leaf version of it. And you can see it gets very puffy at the leaf. It gets this is what they refer to as rugose. All right, so I just want to make sure that you understand it. That's the thing that really makes dwarf varieties different from everything else. Is the main thing that makes it different is the fact that they have what's known as rugose leaf, and the leaf can come in either regular form or it can come in potato leaf form. Another thing too I want to point out about dwarf varieties, a lot of people are under the misconception that these plants stay really small. These plants can get up to 5 feet tall. I've had determinate varieties get quite tall. What happens with these type of varieties is they get to a certain height and they just stop growing, and they really focus on putting out the fruit more than anything. So it's not that they're determinate and they're going to die, it's just they reach a certain height and they get out of the vegetative growth state and they go into the fruiting stage, and that fruiting stage can last several weeks. It can last even a month, and it really focuses on developing the fruit at that size. Whereas determinate varieties, they put out their flowers and clusters all at once, and then they just blast all these tomatoes out at once, and then as soon as those tomatoes start ripening, the plant starts dying. That's really a determinate. So with dwarf varieties, it doesn't quite do that. Sometimes they do. Some of these dwarf varieties are true determinates as well, but some of them generally aren't. They live for a long time. You can prune these plants down and actually get them to start fruiting again, even with the dwarf varieties. I also want to point out something else as well. This is something that I was kind of unfamiliar with, but now I'm starting to get familiar with, and I'm not really sure where compact varieties actually came from. And I wasn't that familiar with compact varieties because I never really heard the term before. It was either dwarf or everything else, right? So now I'm getting more familiar with these terms, and so I've been buying more tomatoes based on the fact that they are compact varieties. So what is a compact variety? Well, let's go and show you. Let's take a look over here. So right here is a good example of what a compact variety is. Okay, you can see how small this plant is in relation to my other plants, right? This is a very, very tiny plant. This isn't a micro dwarf, guys, but this is what you would refer to as a compact variety. And so this plant generally doesn't get too big. What it does is it spreads out wide more than tall. And as you can see, it just wants to kind of lay its clusters down. This would be considered like a basket tomato variety or a container variety. That's generally what you would consider this. You don't want to grow this in your garden, because I already have done that, and it's already get blighted out, and it's because it's laying down on the ground, it's getting blight. You want to grow these in containers so they're off the ground and kind of hang down. You don't want to grow these directly into the soil unless you got really, really good sterile type situation. But these compact varieties are much smaller than dwarf varieties. As you see with my dwarf varieties over there, those dwarf varieties can get anywhere normally between 3 to 5 feet tall. They don't often get 5 feet tall, but they will most likely get between 3 and 4. So you'll get somewhere around there with those. With these compact varieties, as far as height goes, they don't usually get too much higher than maybe 12 inches tall. What they will do is they'll get maybe 24 inches wide. They'll grow really wide and flat to the ground. They don't really get tall. And as you can see, the thing is just, look at all these tomatoes in here. I mean, this thing is just piled up with tomatoes. Now, this is one type of compact variety, just giving you an extreme example of how small they can get. Here's another type of compact variety. This particular variety here is called the Ramblin' Stripe. Now, if you look at the leaf pattern on it, it's just regular leaf. It's not a dwarf variety. However, you can see how this thing grows. It grows like a bush variety of tomato. That's another term that people use to describe these kind of tomato varieties, is bush, because these are more like a bush than they are anything else. But again, you can see the nature of this plant. Now, this one's a lot taller than this one, obviously. So I would call that a very compact variety, and this is just your normal standard compact. So these get a little taller. Yeah, what did I say, 12 inches for that? No, they can get a little taller. And besides, you can see that these are all strung up so they don't hang on the ground. Like I said, they don't really get that much taller. They grow wide and along the ground. That's basically how those kind go. Now, this is the, what is this called here? The Fuzzy Wuzzy variety. Now, they classify this one as a determinate variety, but in my opinion, if you look at it really closely, that doesn't mimic the growing behavior of a dwarf variety. It doesn't even have the leaf indication that this is a dwarf. In my opinion, it's mislabeled as a dwarf. This is a determinate variety, and it's regular leaf, and it would be considered a compact variety. That's my opinion. That's what this is. That's what you're looking at right there. Just to give you an idea of what compact varieties look like in dwarfs. Now, you can see here, again, here's dwarfs. You can see these heights are generally, that hoop is roughly around 3 feet tall from the ground. So they get to around 3 feet, and they're pretty much done. They might go to 4 feet by the end of the season if they live that long, if the blight doesn't get them. But in general, this is about the height, and now they're doing a fruit set. There's another one. That's the one that's got the chartreuse color. And let's see, I have something else here I wanted to show you. See, this isn't a dwarf variety, it's a regular tomato variety, but I put it in a container so it's growing like a dwarf. It's not going to get that big because that pot is already beginning to get root bound, believe it or not, so it's not growing anymore. Okay, this is another dwarf variety. I think that's it with the dwarfs. And then, of course, you have what's known as, not to go too much off track here, you have micro dwarfs here. And these stay really small. These plants really don't get too much bigger than what you see here. And then you have what I refer to as ultra dwarfs, which are like these tomatoes here. They're not technically called ultra dwarfs or nano dwarfs. I'm referring to them as nano dwarfs because they are literally so tiny. They're smaller than any other variety out there. It's very unique type of variety of these particular type of dwarf micro dwarfs as they're called right now. But I'm going to start putting these on my websites as nano or ultra dwarfs because they're so small. They're ridiculous. If you don't know that and you're growing a bed of them and you mix them with these, you're gonna get wiped out. You need to know that these plants don't get very big. So basically that's it. I just wanted to let you know and kind of inform you on what are exactly determinate, indeterminate, and dwarf varieties. They're in a world of their own. Semi-determinate, there is no true classification for semi-determinate. Semi-determinate's kind of like, I don't know, it's not really, it's not, there's no true definition as to what a semi-determinate means, or who classified or came up with that classification, or what is it. Give me an example of a plant that's semi-determinate. I don't know exactly what that means. Like I said, I can manipulate any plant that's generally determinate, and if I manipulate it the right way, I can get determinate varieties to extend its season. Yes, they won't put out as much fruit for the second round, and the fruits will be smaller. However, I can extend its season by pruning it and doing certain things to it to extend that season. And I can get a second crop out of it if I do it correctly. I'll do a video on how to prune, how to second crop your determinate varieties of tomatoes to get a second crop of. Most people who are growing determinate varieties don't even waste their time second cropping your plants because they're not really going to produce fruit. It's easier and faster for you to just start from seed or do what's known as succession planting. When I show you those things, that's just for proof of concept, just to show you that yes, it's not really called determinate. And you can actually, you can actually prune most of these varieties down and get a second crop out of them if you do it correctly. If you do it before the fruits ripen and shit, there's a certain way to do it. You can't do that. And some varieties, once they put their fruit out, they're already dying. There's no saving them. They die right away. They die before the fruits even ripen sometimes. They just wither away and they just drop dead. So, yeah, that does happen. But I just wanted to make sure that you understood the clear distinction between, dwarf varieties and what a dwarf variety truly is. If you never heard of the Dwarf Tomato Project, go look them up. They did a lot of work to actually produce this project and get all of these, varieties out in the open and did all this crossbreeding. And they really, I have to give those guys and girls credit for really doing what they did. They really took on a really major type of breeding program that was, it took a lot of people to actually do this. It wasn't just somebody's backyard thing type doing it. They put a lot of work into the Dwarf Tomato Project. I'll do a video on that separately, and we'll talk a little bit about their project. I'm not involved with it or anything, but I really like what they did. And as you can see, let me show you again. These are some of the varieties of the Dwarf Tomato Project's work. These are different varieties. I don't know what they are offhand. I'm not going to go digging down into these, but these are all part of their project, and they're gorgeous plants. I mean, look at these healthy looking plants. I mean, they're unbelievable. Not this one. That one's something else. I think that's something else there. That's something else. This is the woolly blue jay. Look at this thing. Isn't that gorgeous? It's really, the leaves are curling up a little bit like that because it's been literally 100 degrees every single day. I mean, it's been absolutely cooking. It's been cooking every single day, but it's also been raining really heavy, so that's good. It cools it down, but that sun has been absolutely brutal. This is a beautiful variegated variety. We'll talk about this. I'll be doing videos on that soon. But this is another one of their project varieties. You can see they have a very unique feature. And what the founder of the Dwarf Tomato Project did was he basically brought back the original heirloom that was referred to as Dwarf. He brought that back, and then you have to read the whole thing about them. They really did an amazing job on it, and I really loved the varieties. In fact, I'm going to be getting more of the varieties next year. And I'm going to be focusing a lot more on dwarf varieties. As you can see, these plants are doing phenomenal. They're absolutely loaded with fruit, too. I mean, look at this. I mean, there's fruit on these things. Man, they are loaded and loaded with fruit. I got tomatoes all the way down the line. But, so anyway, guys, I hope I answered some questions about what are dwarf varieties, what are compact varieties. And there's other terms, bush variety. A lot of people refer to bush oftentimes, and what they're really referring to are these compact varieties. As you can see, they grow flat and along the ground. They don't like to grow upwards at all. It's just the stem structure on them are really small. You know, you can see that they're really small and kind of just weird looking. But they're great varieties to grow, guys. If you don't have a lot of room, and you just got a balcony, that's the way to go. If you go compact, I wouldn't even suggest going with dwarf because, like I said, dwarf varieties, you can see these things can get quite large. And these aren't as large as they can get. They can actually get bigger. Had I grown these in the ground, they probably would have got about a foot to maybe 2 feet taller. So in the pails, they're kind of small. But that's it, guys. That's just a quick video on the difference between what dwarfs are and compact varieties and, you know, indeterminate and determinate. I just wanted to touch base on that a little bit. All right, so hope you liked the video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.